All right, take it away.
And I was muted. Good morning, or I guess it's noon now. So thanks for having me today. My name is Mari Brown, and I work for Ask Resource Center. And so today we're going to be talking about success in the classroom. But first, I was going to tell you a little bit about myself. I have worked for Ask for a little over 20 years now. I have a younger brother that has multiple disabilities, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Ask as I move through the presentation here. Um, but we're a resource center for families of children with disabilities, and here to help families navigate services. I'm currently the data coordinator at Ask. Um, but I have worked in the family support role and at the front desk, and had a number of different roles throughout my time at Ask Resource Center. Um, so I'm looking forward to talking with you all today about success in the classroom and some questions around IEPs and 504 plans. And so hopefully we can help you understand those processes and what the services look like. So please feel free to take that poll that's in the chat there or that popped up on your screen. And I'm going to move forward here. Ask Resource Center has a number of different projects, and we are a nonprofit agency, and so the projects change at different times throughout the years, but we have held the Parent Training and Information Center grant since 1997. We are also the Family to Family Health Information Center, and we have a couple of contracts with the Iowa Department of Education, and one of those is for the Transition Iowa website, which I'll mention again here briefly. And a new contract that we have with the Iowa Department of Education to provide family support. And so some of you may be familiar with the Family Educator Partner Program that used to be through the AEAs, and that program has gone away now. But we have taken the role of the FEP and to provide family support services to families in the state of Iowa through the Department of Education. So just as someone could have reached out to their family FEP in the past, Ask would be the new contact for them. And so the Parent Training and Information Center is part of a national network of parent centers. There's a requirement in the special education law for a parent training and information center in every state. And so we are Iowa's Parent Training and Information Center. And I would encourage people, if they were considering moving or going to be moving to a new state, to reach out to the parent center in the state that they're going to get a better understanding of the way services work in that state. So you can find the Parent Center Network at the website. And gosh, I just realized the website's not on the screen there. It's called the parentcenterhub.org. And so that's a good place to find resources around parent centers. And I'll go ahead and put that. Okay, and we are not a legal services agency, and so I am not an attorney, and so please do not take any of this information today as legal advice. It's just here to help you understand the process. So some of the things that we provide through Ask is one-to-one family navigation services and support. So a lot of times a family will reach out with a question or a concern, and we can just try to help them understand maybe what the law says, kind of brainstorm about what have you tried, and help brainstorm some other options. just kind of support them through the process of understanding, what the law says or how to navigate these services for their child. So we serve families birth to 26 is what our board has laid out. But to be honest, we get calls from families with people with disabilities that are all kinds of ages. So we will try to answer those questions or get you to someone who is able to answer them if we're not able to. And I wanted to highlight the Transition Iowa website. This website is a resource for transition planning. It provides resources that support transition planning for youth. And so it's really 14 plus probably would be around the age that we would start utilizing a lot of these resources. There's all kinds of great information on the Transition Iowa website, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone who's interested more about that as well. So today we're just going to talk about IEPs and 504 plans and what the process is to become eligible. Also, what the difference between those two plans are, and what some important rights that parents have in those processes. So this visual represents the the picture of what special education looks like for students with disabilities. The large bubble is all students in public schools. The gray bubble in the middle is students that are eligible for accommodations through a Section 504 plan. And then the white bubble is students that are eligible for special education services through IDEA. And as you can see, they overlap each other. So all of the same laws and rules that apply to students in general public school under the Every Student Succeeds Act also applies to students with disabilities under Section 504 and IDEA. Also, Section 504 does cover students that are eligible for special education services, but the reverse is not true. So everybody that is eligible for that under 504 is not also eligible for special education services. But the rights that are covered under Section 504 are the same types of rights that are covered under special education. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but we'll talk about that more moving forward here. And so Section 504 essentially says that no otherwise qualified person with a disability in the United States shall solely, by the reason of his or her disability, be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of or subject to any discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And so essentially any program that receives federal funding is covered by Section 504. And there's a lot of different places where that's the case. Section 504 it applies. It's a civil rights law. Again, protects against discrimination and should give equal access to the same programs and services as any other student would have access to. And so, again, though, this applies in lots of different settings. So public school education, but also federal employment programs and public parks, public recs departments. And so it really applies in lots of different settings, also college. And so there's a lot of different places where Section 504 applies for for people with disabilities. And if I could see my handout, I was going to drop in the chat. We do have a document that talks all about Section 504 plans. And so I'm going to put that in the chat here for anybody that's interested in that. document. And so really what is 504? It again provides accommodations in order to have access to programs. And so the main service or support that's available to people with disabilities under Section 504 is accommodations. And what is an accommodation, really? An accommodation allows a student to complete the same assignment or test as other students, but with a change in maybe the timing, the formatting, the setting, the scheduling, maybe the way to respond or the presentation. And so that type of accommodation would not alter any significant portion of the assignment or test. Or the measures of that. And so an example of an accommodation might be like a student who is blind that's taking a Braille version of a test, or a student taking a test alone in a quiet environment if they needed something like that. And so who is eligible for Section 504? There's a couple different prongs they refer to it. And so there has to be a disability that substantially limits one or more major life activities, and because of those things needs accommodations. And so we'll talk more about each of those different pieces here moving forward. Some examples of a disability are here on the screen, but the Office of Civil Rights, which is the entity that oversees Section 504, does not provide an exhaustive list of disabilities that are covered under Section 504. And so those disabilities could be lots of different things, just about anything really. As long as it is going to be a barrier or something that's impacting that person for more than 6 months. And so that could be something like a broken arm or leg, if that was going to be an ongoing issue for more than 6 months, but also includes things like ADHD, dyslexia, depression, could be really any disability. And so again, with this law, there's lots of room for interpretation. And that's kind of true of all the laws around IEPs and 504 plans. The government outlines these certain pieces, but doesn't always give a lot of in-depth detail about what those things cover. So the determination of what a substantial limitation is an individual decision and made by each school district. Depends on the nature and severity of the person's condition. And so there really isn't a very clear guideline or outline about that substantial limitation. So that can be a little difficult to navigate. But major life activities include lots of different things. And so again, not an exhaustive list. There's no exhaustive list that's available. And so essentially you can kind of make the case for any major life activities that you think may be impacting that person. And so breathing, working, learning, seeing, walking, digesting, it could be lots of different things. And so, just to be able to think about what is that major life activity that's being impacted by the disability. And so each school does that evaluation process a little bit differently. There is no standardized process that's across the whole state. Each district determines their own policies and procedures around evaluation and eligibility for Section 504. Some schools do require a medical diagnosis or some kind of documentation of a disability. And then sometimes what we'll see is like something like a checklist that gets sent around to teachers to ask, have they seen any substantial limitations in the classroom. And so it does vary quite a bit by district of what exactly that looks like. There should be a 504 like a guide or a manual that outlines the process that a district is going to use to determine eligibility. And we do have, oh, shoot. We do have a sample letter to request a 504 plan. And I'm going to put that here in the chat. Didn't mean to stop sharing there. Sorry about that. And so we do suggest making a request for a 504 plan in writing. And just creating a paper trail is a good way to help make sure that things happen the way they're supposed to. So feel free to use that sample letter to request a 504 meeting with the school. Typically, there would be a meeting to talk about what all your concerns are and explain what that evaluation process would look like. If a student is eligible for a 504 plan, then there would typically be a team that would get together and write up that plan and discuss what all accommodations would be appropriate for that student. And so it's really important to be as specific as possible in those plans about what is that accommodation that's needed, how will it be provided, you know, kind of who, what, where, when, why, when will it happen, who's responsible for providing it. And again, I think it's so important to just be really specific about how that's going to work and what that looks like and when it should happen. Sometimes the plan might say, the student may have this accommodation versus they will have this accommodation. And to be honest, that language does matter. When if it's a may, then then they may have that accommodation, but it doesn't mean that they will for sure have that accommodation. And so those little words can make a difference. I think sometimes the other piece that gets a little difficult is when the school sometimes is expecting that student to go ahead and ask for that accommodation. And so if you have a student that may not go ahead and ask for that accommodation without some support, it might be better to write that accommodation more specifically about, how the student will be approached or when the student will be approached about taking them up on that accommodation. Section 504 does also cover accommodations to extracurricular and non-academic activities. And so again, a student with a disability should have access to the same things as everybody else. And so that includes field trips, extracurricular activities like debate club or the sports teams and things like that. So essentially all the same things as everybody else. And there should be a 504 coordinator at each school and also for the district. And sometimes you can find the 504 guide on the district website. There should also be a complaint process that is described in that manual. If a parent had a concern or, felt like maybe the plan wasn't being followed the way it was supposed to, what is the recourse that they would have? And so that is something that should be described in that 504 manual. The thing about 504 plans is that there isn't really anybody at the state of Iowa Department of Education who's overseeing and collecting data around all the students that have 504 plans in the state. It's really the Office of Civil Rights out of, I believe it's the Chicago, or is it Kansas City office that covers Iowa. And so, you know, um, if you had a complaint that goes beyond your district level, it's good to utilize that district process first, but then there is a complaint process through the Office of Civil Rights. Um, and so you can utilize that if you need to. But again, that's not somebody that's in the state of Iowa. And so it's a little bit, removed. And I do think, like I said, it's good to utilize the processes that are available in your district and, um, you know, go through those first before taking the next steps to the OCR. Okay, so that's a little bit about Section 504. And so now we're going to talk a little bit and go into the section around special education and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so IDEA is essentially the special education law. It provides services to eligible individuals from birth to 21. And so if you had a small child that receives early access services in the state of Iowa, that would also be IDEA, special education services. Special education, it has a set of procedural safeguards, and this law is updated ever so often, but the last time it was updated was 2004. And so it is due for an update. They've been kind of talking about that coming for a while, but I think it's been put on hold recently. Under IDEA, there are 6 main principles of the law. And so that's free and appropriate public education, an appropriate evaluation, the IEP, the least restrictive environment, parent and student participation in decision-making, and procedural safeguards. So we'll talk about each of those here moving forward. And so what is FAPE? FAPE essentially means that if you have a child with a disability that needs some things to be done in a little different way, that those should be provided in an appropriate way at the public expense and under public supervision. So there shouldn't be any cost to parents beyond the typical book fees that apply to any other student. And the whole idea with the IEP is that it's individualized to meet that student's needs according to the IEP. And again, this is for ages 3 to 21, school aged, 3 to 21, and includes students who have been suspended or expelled. And so there are a couple special pieces for those types of situations. Under IDEA, an evaluation is required in order to be eligible for services. And so the AEA in Iowa is required to conduct an evaluation to determine eligibility, and if the child is eligible to determine the needs of that student. So, sometimes a parent will have a note from a doctor or therapist or somebody like that indicates that student might be eligible for services under a Section 504 or IEP plan. And even if that is the case and they do have something in writing from a doctor, the school district or the AEA would still be required to conduct their own evaluation to determine eligibility. And so we do have a sample letter to request eligibility under IDEA for a student on our website. We do suggest making those requests in writing. And once the parent signs consent for that evaluation, those evaluations must be completed within 60 calendar days. On the right side of the screen there is the different skill areas where a student can be evaluated. And so It's important for evaluations to be comprehensive and cover any skill areas that might be getting in the way of learning. And so um, when parents sign consent, those check boxes are on that consent form and would indicate the different skill areas that will be covered in that evaluation. Um, and so it's important to have some conversation about which pieces need to be evaluated and which don't. Sometimes we see that not all those boxes get checked that maybe could. And so, if there's something missing from that evaluation, then the student might not be eligible just based on that one area that was missing and wasn't evaluated. And so it is very important to do a comprehensive evaluation and really cover all of those skill areas that might be getting in the way of a student's learning. Once that evaluation has been completed, then there would need to be a meeting to determine eligibility. And the AEA typically writes up what's called an educational evaluation report, an EER. And so we suggest that parents ask for a copy of that EER ahead of time because it's a lot to process right there on the spot when you're talking with that IEP team. It might be even, 10 pages or something worth of information about all the different tests and assessments or observations that they did as part of the evaluation process. And so it can be helpful to just request that ahead of time so parents have a chance to take their time reading through that, really think about any questions that they have, and, could consider comparing it to like maybe an outside evaluation that they have um, in addition. And so this slide just kind of outlines the IEP process where a child is identified as possibly needing services. And so there's a screening process that they use to determine whether or not to move forward with a full evaluation for that student. Just because a parent requests an evaluation does not mean they have to do that full evaluation every time. Like I said, that screening process is used to determine whether or not a disability is suspected that may be getting in the way of the child's learning. So once the child is evaluated, then eligibility would be decided. If that child is eligible, then an IEP meeting would be held and written on a yearly basis. The progress would be monitored throughout the year. And every 3 years, a reevaluation is required to determine whether or not the needs have changed and whether the student is still eligible for services. Again, an IEP meeting should be held at least yearly, and parents can request an IEP meeting anytime they want. So if the child isn't making the progress that's expected, then it would definitely be appropriate to request an IEP meeting to do some problem solving with the team about that. So this is a screenshot of the new Achieve system, which is the system that the state of Iowa is using for IEPs. There is a promise to us that there will be what they're calling a parent portal, a way for parents to log into the IEP system and have quick access to get to that IEP and to the progress monitoring. And so we're expecting that the parent portal to Achieve will be available. Right now they're saying late fall. So we're fingers crossed that that will take place. It is a really cool feature that we've understand that Iowa would be the first in the country to have something like that, a way for parents to log in independently and access their child's progress monitoring and IEP documentation. And so, kind of setting the bar here. We don't have a lot of precedent for that. And so it's something they're working through a lot of little kinks to get out here, like I said, hopefully late fall. And so the IEP is the Individualized Education Program. It's a written statement for each child with a disability that's developed, reviewed, and revised at least annually. And that should involve educators, parents, and anybody else that you feel like might be appropriate to include in that conversation. There are some required IEP team members. And so those people include an invitation, at least to the students' parents, at least one general education teacher, at least one special education teacher, a representative of the school district, essentially who can provide, um, that supervises the services and who can make decisions about the IEP services. And also, if an evaluation has taken place, there should be somebody who can interpret those evaluation results. Others invited by the school or the parents, and like I said, parents can invite anyone they would like to that meeting. And then the student whenever it's appropriate as well. And so the key word with the IEP is individualized. It shouldn't be that special education is that room at the end of the hallway anymore. Special education can happen in any environment, and it can look a lot of different ways. And so with this IEP planning, the idea is that we should design that program first, what those services and supports should look like first, and then determine what the appropriate placement would be second. So it shouldn't be that students in this classroom get this set of services or anything along those lines. You know, um, that's what the I is for. It should be individualized. And so it's not just, this is what we have available here. It should be really individualized to meet that student's needs. So the big difference between the IEP and the 504 plan is that an IEP can have all of the same accommodations that would be on a 504 plan, but it would also include goals. And so every student that has an IEP would have at least one measurable annual goal. And those goals, again, are designed for just 1 year out. And then it should also include some information about what that progress monitoring should look like. So if we're working on, reading, where are we at right now and where are we hoping to be in 1 year? And how are we going to monitor that progress? And how will that be shared with the family throughout the year to make sure that the progress is happening the way it's supposed to be. Um, if it's not, then the school or the teacher can make some instructional changes to do some problem solving with that. But if there's kind of a continual not seeing the progress that we're hoping to see, it's definitely an appropriate time to call an IEP meeting and do some problem solving with the full team. Um, the progress monitoring sometimes is collected on a weekly basis. Sometimes it's every other week. Sometimes it's daily. It really just depends on the type of goal that's included on that IEP. Usually a behavioral goal will be monitored more like on a daily basis, whereas a reading goal might be monitored on a weekly or bi-weekly basis because, it's harder to see the progress on the reading in a shorter period of time. And so it's important for the IEP team to discuss those details of what the progress monitoring will look like and how often parents will receive updates on that. Parents should receive those progress monitoring reports at least as often as a report card. And then the other big difference between the IEP and the 504 plan is that the IEP could include related services. And so that would be things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, um, speech therapy, things like that. And so the services section of the IEP should detail out each service and support and the details of that. So how many minutes that service is going to be provided, what environment is it going to be provided in, who's responsible for providing that, just like with the 504 accommodations. Um, and accommodations are typically also listed out in the services section of the IEP towards the back. And so that would include all of those accommodations and supports that student would need. Um, that services page, I think, is a good way to get an understanding, kind of a snapshot of what all is included on that student's IEP. So if you just had a couple minutes to look over a document to try to understand what was part of a student's IEP, I think that services page is a good place to um, look down the list and see what all should be included in that plan. And then transition planning is another piece of the IEP process. Starting at age 14 in Iowa, we have to start thinking about life after high school. And the three different areas that we focus on is living, learning, and working after high school. And so the IEP team should discuss what the post-secondary expectations are for that student. So what do we expect them to be doing in the area of living? What do we expect them to be doing in the area of learning? And what do we expect them to be doing in the area of working after high school? And are they ready for that next step? And if not, then the team should consider adding some goals or services, some transition goals to help that student get ready for that next step. And so those can look like a lot of different things. It might be self-advocacy skills. It might be working on some work-related kinds of skills. It can be a lot of different things, but it is a requirement to start at age 14 with that conversation about living, learning, and working after high school, and whether or not we need to add new goals and additional goals for that student to be successful in that next environment. And one of the key components in the special education law is the least restrictive environment. And so, like I said, special education is not the room at the end of the hallway anymore. It's not a place. It's a service, and it can happen in lots of different settings. It can even take place in the general education classroom. And so what the law says is that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions, should be educated with children who are not disabled as much as it's appropriate for them. And so really students should have access to same age peers without disabilities, again, as much as it's appropriate for them. And so schools should consider any services or supports that might be appropriate first before moving a student to a more restrictive setting. And so that's something that should be discussed by the IEP team is, again, what those services look like, and then where should they be provided? And, is there any extra support that that student might need to be successful in that gen ed classroom? And so those should be covered with that. Okay, and then one of our last principles in the special education law is parent and student participation in decision making. And so what does that really mean is that parents and students, when it's appropriate, should be involved in the development and review of the IEP, in making educational placement decisions, reviewing evaluation data, and determining what data needs to be collected during an evaluation, and of course, transition planning starting at age 14. Some of the other rights that parents have include meeting notices, the parental rights notice, which is the procedural safeguards manual, which describes all of the parent rights in the special education process. And then a prior written notice. And that written notice is to document changes to the IEP when the school is proposing any significant changes, like maybe taking away a goal or taking away a service, or adding a new goal or service. Then a written notice should be provided to the family explaining how that decision was made, what kind of data was used to make that decision, and what other options were considered. So why that's the most appropriate option for that student's needs. And then parents should also have access to student records to review records and obtain copies, and could place a statement of correction in a record. There is also a set of procedural safeguards that includes dispute resolution options. And so if parents are having some disagreements with the IEP team about what is appropriate or not for the IEP, there are some options to help resolve those conflicts, and they're listed there on the screen. If anybody's getting to that type of situation, it's definitely a good time to reach out to Ask Resource Center, and we can try to help families understand their options and the little details of what these options include. Okay. And so questions. It looks like we have the poll going here as well.
Mari, I really appreciate your time today. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing your time and talent with us today. I
Yep.
have gone ahead and taken I've given participants the ability to unmute themselves if they want to ask or comment on anything. I hadn't seen anything come up in the chat, so I'll go ahead and pause now if anyone has any questions or comments for our speaker.
Okay, well, feel free to connect with us through our website, our Facebook page. We've got lots of those info sheets there. We do have a conference that we do every year, the first weekend of May. We have an online support group that we do the first Monday of the month. And so feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or concerns that we might be able to help with. Thanks for your time today. I know this was a lot of information, so let me know if you have some questions around any of these topics.
Thank you again, Mari, and for all of our attendees today. Again, this recording will be shared to our YouTube page within the next 24 to 48 hours. So you can look for that and share that with folks. Thank you so much again for presenting for us today. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everybody. Thank you.